Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to Geeks Not Nerds, the podcast. I'm Captain Logan.
And I am Dan.
Dan, today we're going to be watching Star Wars A New Hope.
Yay! This is one of my favorite things.
Now, I want to preface this by saying that I never intended on doing really any Star Wars content on the channel. I've talked about Star Wars on the podcast before with Dan, after it was announced that Disney bought out Lucasfilm. And,
that was with Eric, wasn't it?
Oh, you're right! That was with Eric. Didn't you and I do something on Star Wars at some point? Maybe we didn't.
No, we did a podcast on Trek, but I don't think we've ever done anything on Wars other than the new acquisition stuff.
No, I'm sorry. I'm glad you mentioned that. Well, that's fun. That means so now I am encroaching completely onto Dan's territory because Dan is all about Star Wars, and I've been kind of bringing him into Trek a little bit, and he's been enjoying it, and we've been doing that together. But I thought it only fair to do Dan's favorite thing, and what better way to get into that than just do a commentary on A New Hope. Now, folks have been asking us to do this for quite a while now. I always said I've got nothing insightful to say about Star Wars. This is not something that I know a great deal about. Certainly I watched these when I was a kid, and I've seen them all and multiple times, and all of that, but, I'm not into expanded universe. I can't tell you names of stuff that's not in the movies, and that sort of thing. So, I am absolutely a novice in this particular neck of the woods. So, I just want to let everyone know that if you want to listen to Captain Logan doing a commentary on Star Wars, it's going to be like listening to anyone doing a commentary on Star Wars. I don't know what this is going to be like, but, I'm flattered that people wanted this, but I have no idea why anybody wants to listen to me talk about Star Wars. So anyway, that's why I brought in Dan, and this will probably be a lot more of Dan talking about Star Wars. Dan, anything you want to, any kind of preamble you want to give us before we get started on this? What is your background with Star Wars?
Star Wars is really the reason why I'm so interested in genre fiction and all of the geeky things that I'm into today. It was sort of the first thing that my parents showed me by accident, because they're not into the stuff that I'm into at all. They were just like, hey, a lot of people like Star Wars, maybe you'd like this. And it led to all the other things that I'm into now. And I used to eat, breathe, and live Star Wars when I was a kid. I used to be able to name all the aliens in the cantina. I used to know pretty much everything about it that was contained in all those big encyclopedia tomes that you could buy. I don't know all of that stuff anymore because it sort of faded with age and not being as well versed in it anymore. But I like Star Wars a lot, to say the least.
Well, folks, if you've never listened to us do a commentary like this before, what we do is we do a podcast while simultaneously watching the film. That sounds a lot like a commentary, but it's both. What we like to do is we like to give you plenty of context if you're not actually watching the film with us, so that you can follow along with us if you want to just listen to this like you'd listen to a regular podcast. And we'll do our level best to talk throughout the entire thing, leaving no giant gaps. Dan and I are watching the DVD special edition. Mine says limited edition. I've actually got the cool double discs from the early 2000s. Actually, I'm sorry, this is from 08, that actually give you the theatrical version on the second disc. We wanted to do this theatrical, but Dan doesn't have this, and also we thought most people probably don't have the theatrical right now, and that's something I'm sure we'll talk quite a bit about, Dan. Anyway, so This is one of those, it's kind of annoying in that we have to be very specific about which one we're watching. To give you a sense of it, if this is helpful for people, because there's so many different versions. First of all, obviously not the Blu-rays, because they've done even more things with it there. This is the DVDs, and our timestamps, both of us are showing that our film is 2 hours, 4 minutes, and 38 seconds long. So if your film is 2 hours, 4 seconds, and 38 seconds long, or 4 minutes and 38 seconds long, chances are you're watching what we're watching. So we're going to be able to discuss a little bit of the remaster stuff, too, which will be interesting, to say the least. Dan, are you ready?
I am ready. I'm actually really excited.
Okay, go ahead and bring up your DVD and get it past the menus and everything. And everybody make sure and hit play as soon as I say now. Here we go. And hit play right now.
20th Century Fox. Ironic that the Disney logo will be in front of Episode 7, the first Star Wars film that won't have that.
That's going to be strange.
It's going to be really strange, especially without the music and the Lucasfilm logo. Ugh.
Well, are you sure that they'll lose the Lucasfilm logo? Because, I mean...
Yeah, but they always play the Fox tune behind it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I'm sure the logo will still be there.
Yeah. I'm just saying it's going to be strange.
Oh, no, that will be absolutely strange.
And they did change the logo to the current Star Wars logo in the remasters from the original blue long lettered logo that we have originally from when it wasn't called A New Hope. And
oh yeah, that's right.
Which I don't mind.
I've not seen these so many times that I would notice those small, minute kind of things.
Yeah, I have, as you can tell. And I mean, that's kind of a pathetic thing to notice, I think.
No, not at all. Dude, there's weird stuff like that with Trek that I know. I remember when I was a kid trying to read this and always thinking, it's really weird trying to read something that's at an angle in space like that.
It is kind of strange. I don't think I've actually ever memorized or like read through the entire scroll of all of the movies. I never really paid attention to them when I was a kid, to be honest.
I didn't either. They were too awkward to look at.
Yeah. And in the movie, you get pretty much all you need to know anyway, so.
Well, it doesn't feel as weird on a giant screen. So, like, in a movie theater, it's a little easier to see what you're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I think this scene is good enough at establishing the stakes and who's involved in the fighting here, well enough that we don't really need the opening scroll. But it's cool to have because it homages the old serials and stuff.
This is something that's been said a million bazillion times, but the thing about this opening scene is that it tells you how simple this story is.
Mm-hmm. You got a big, powerful empire that its reach can go anywhere against these small band of rebels, and just from that shot where you have the small rebel ship come in and then the big Star Destroyer come in and take up the entire frame, really tells you a lot about what's going to happen here.
It's one of the funniest things about Spaceballs. It's just that opening scene where the ship never ends. And then at the end, it's got like a bumper sticker that says "Space for Rent" or something.
Yeah, I love Spaceballs.
Dan, something I have a hard time with now watching these movies is not thinking about the Lego games.
Oh yeah,
because I played all of them and I spent so much time with them that like I'm used to being in all these areas in Lego form.
Those games are very fun. And I think Star Wars is probably the best thing to explore Lego-wise in video games and stuff. Just because of the diversity of locations and stuff.
If you want to experience all of John Williams' soundtrack without just sitting down listening to a CD, just play the Lego games because you'll hear all of it at infinitum.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
And it will get stuck in your head for days.
Yes, it will, because the score for this movie, and all of the Star Wars movies, really, even the prequels, is fantastic. I mean, that's the one thing that everyone stereotypically always says about the prequels, but it's true. Yeah,
they're trying to go to something positive. They go, well, the music's great!
Yeah.
Yay! I always say it like that, too. That's great!
Yeah, and then, devolves into all the bad stuff. But, see, I think this scene here is really, really cool, opening to a movie. Because we have the introduction to the villain right away, and you can, you're introduced to how ominous and powerful this guy is. It's great stuff. Great introduction for Vader, I think.
I think one of the big reasons that Star Wars immediately caught on so hard is because right out the gate, it is both familiar and original.
Oh yeah, definitely.
We feel like if you can put yourself back into the headspace of somebody that would have watched this in '77, especially somebody who grew up with science fiction serials and things like that. They've been here before. They've seen this. When they see the guy in the black walk out, they've seen that before. These and like these laser battles in the middle of like thin hallways and even sentient robots and stuff like this is familiar territory, and yet there's a look about it that's so immediately distinct.
Yes, exactly, and I think it's almost the sort of thing where like it's obviously not the same thing of taking a comic book and putting it on screen, obviously, because with the serial in this it's still film, but I don't think anyone had tried to do the serial thing with in a contemporary way that looked this good, you know what I mean? It was like a big deal for people to see something that they had loved from their childhoods done in such a way where it was, big budget. Not that this movie had a big budget at the time, but it looks like it has a budget.
Yeah, and they use their money well, and it looks a lot more, it looks a lot larger and a lot more epic and a lot more heightened than, the kind of cardboard stuff, looking stuff you would have been used to if you'd gone to those early serials in, say, the 40s.
Right, exactly.
50s, yeah.
And there's the only time we see a blaster set for stun and use stun in any of the Star Wars movies.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot that was there.
That never really comes up again in that blip circle of the blaster rifle. I don't think that's ever used again.
Every time I watch Star Wars, I always think about going back and watching some like the old Buck Rogers movies and things like that, which I watched some growing up.
Yeah, I bet you'd pick up on so many homages, because that's one of the things that Lucas
that's what this is
talking about. Yeah.
And I think that it says a lot that this eclipsed all of that. I think a lot of people, and I'll try not to harp on this too hard, but I think a lot of people are either not aware or have forgotten that this is a huge homage piece. This is entirely derivative, and not in a bad way. There's a lot of original here, but I just mean that in concept and in premise, it's borrowing from a lot of stuff.
Right, exactly. It's borrowing from things in the best way possible, where, like, you're not telling the same... He's telling a familiar story, but not the same story. There's a distinct difference between the two of them, I think.
Well, and I think it's modernizing it for the time. I think it's saying, what if we made one of these now? What would it look like? And immediately there's just this sense of fun about it, right? Where you watch it. That's what sucks about watching these now, is that we think of episode 4 as, well, we already know what 1, 2, and 3 look like. But back then, it's only episode 4 because these things were serialized. So wouldn't it be fun if it had a number like that?
Right, exactly.
If you can look at this within its own context, this is a lot of fun as a singular piece. Even taking it away from even 5 and 6, just by itself, it's a really fun singular piece.
Oh yeah, definitely. And one of the things that I think is interesting, when you look at films that try to do what Star Wars did today, like Avatar, where they're taking a familiar story and putting it in a setting that they hadn't really done it in before, because, like, even though Star Wars homages space serials a lot, it also has a samurai aspect to it with the Jedi and the Force, the honor, the religion, that sort of thing. And it's sort of doing samurais in space. And you have Avatar, which is sort of the typical Native American, Pocahontas culture class kind of story, but just done in space. And a lot of people didn't like that film because it was so derivative. It's interesting that didn't happen to Star Wars at all.
And I think they were worried about it.
Mm-hmm.
That it would. I mean, when Star Wars came out, Lucas and everybody involved, nobody knew what it was going to do.
No, Alec Guinness said that when he was on set, he read through his dialogue, and he's like, "This is," I don't forget the exact quote, I'm paraphrasing, but he said it's a bunch of fairy tale jibber jabber, and it wasn't going to go anywhere. He thought, he was kind of phoning it in, to be honest, playing Obi-Wan, which, says a lot about this guy's skill as an actor, because he's...
Yeah, because it doesn't seem like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think it would be really easy to be in something like this and not understand what it was.
Right, exactly.
I think
especially
people have
when you're filming all the scenes out of context, presumably.
You look at that with science fiction, you look at that with superhero films. If you go back to 89, like, you hear stories where Michael Keaton will say there were times where we just started cracking up on set because what we were wearing was so absurd. That doesn't happen now.
Right. I mean, the closest thing I've heard to that was like when they were interviewing the cast of the Avengers, and they're like, "How do you think the movie came out?" before they got to see it, and they were like, "We have no idea. we're hoping that it comes together as a cohesive piece, but you know."
This is also a movie that, and they're able to do this because it's supposed to be in this serial kind of context, that does in medias res really, really well. Being in the middle of the action without having to jump around time. You have that line that we just passed where C-3PO says, "No more adventures, I'm going this way." You get this context that these robots, but then these people have already been through things, and there's been a lot of adventures that we didn't get to see already.
Yeah, and that plays into the whole entire world of Star Wars, too. Like, a lot of people thought this was such an interesting science fiction world because it looked used. It wasn't pristine and very grandiose. I mean, this is kind of a trashy-looking science fiction world where everything's gritty and dirty, and it just looks like this place has existed for a while, and we're not necessarily being introduced to the world, and it doesn't concern itself with explaining all the technology. It uses a lot of buzzwords that just, sound cool for things like hyperdrive and things like that. There's not a lot of science in this film, so it's interesting. That was one of the unique things I think it did at the time, too.
It's not worried about, are we going to understand who these people are? And that's why this is one of those less is more kind of things, right? Mm-hmm. Where, because the story out the gate, and it gets more complicated with the sequels, but the story out the gate is simple enough that it doesn't have to worry about setting up a franchise. It doesn't have to worry, are you gonna understand who Luke Skywalker is and who these characters are? There's a lot of characters in this film, and they're pretty archetypal, and that's done on purpose. We don't have to just sit here and explain things all the time. It moves at a clip, and I think that the world building that you're talking about is a lot of what kind of entranced people about it. That we felt like we were, you said we're not really introduced to the world. I would argue that that's primarily what we're introduced to. That people are,
right.
that we're kind of thrust into this universe as if we're supposed to be here already, but it's also not confusing because it's not overly complicated. I feel like that's a problem that the prequels have, is that they feel overly complicated because there's a lot of heavy exposition being thrown at you constantly.
Right. And maybe the better term for not introducing to the world, maybe what I meant was we're not being spoon-fed every detail about this world. It's leaving a lot up to our imagination. At the same time as it's showing us some of the world, right? Because we're seeing like parts of Tatooine here, but we're not getting a sense of like what the greater galaxy looks like at this point.
Yeah, good point. But I think it's important that to get the scope of it, we started in space.
Exactly, yeah. Because we get the sense here we're on this desert planet, maybe that the Empire's rule isn't going as well as they would have liked it to have been, where you have this society that's sort of disorganized and everyone's nomadic and stuff. Which, based on things that we know further, the Empire doesn't have complete jurisdiction in the Outer Rim and stuff, but just for someone that hasn't read any of the Expanded Universe or anything like that, that's what it would seem like to them.
I wonder how much of a different experience, Dan, you have with this already knowing all of that Expanded Universe stuff, because even what little I know, and I mean I've read a little bit here and there, even what little I know, I always with this first one like to try to watch it clearing my mind of all of that, because I feel like that's the experience you're supposed to have with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because I've never really tried to do that. I've just sort of always taken it as the introductory film to the franchise, I suppose.
Oh, sure.
Because as a kid, I sort of that's how it was already pre-established, if you know what I mean. So I never really thought to take it out of context. That would be a really interesting experience. I'd really like to do that sometime.
I guess when I watch something like this, I'm just kind of thinking about, I think production a lot, and I'm thinking about what it was intended to do versus what it became. And again, clearly, it was intended to give you this kind of you walk into a serial you've never seen before kind of experience.
Right.
This right here is really the first scene, I think, where the remastered stuff starts to really encroach upon the film.
I agree.
I honestly didn't notice much of it prior to this in the first 20 minutes or so.
It's frustrating because the model work and the physical, practical effects in these movies, the original trilogy, look so good. And then you have the CGI things, and they just look really out of place.
It doesn't integrate well.
It doesn't integrate well at all.
And how important was it really that we had these extra stormtroopers walking around? Riding around on those big animals, right?
Yeah, I mean, like,
do we have to have that? Why? Like, why?
I mean, maybe because they wanted to make a Dewback toy. I don't know.
Well, did we not have already one of those somewhere in this movie, or?
I can't remember, and if it is, it might. See, I'm unique in that my parents bought me the special editions when I was a kid, and even the VHS tapes that I rented were special editions, so I've never actually seen the original theatrical versions of the Star Wars.
Oh,
trilogy.
You haven't?
I have not seen them, no.
Okay, and see, that's all I've watched these maybe once, because I don't like them as well.
I don't blame you. I'd like to sometime.
Maybe this is the place we should have this conversation. I feel like a piece ought to stand on its own. I feel like a director's cut is a totally different thing. Mm-hmm. You know, when a film got put out and it wasn't quite what the director wanted, and producers in a studio kind of got their hands on it and they said this has to be ripped out and this sort. That's different. You can have a couple of versions. This is what I wanted to go out to print. It didn't quite go out to print. But this idea that the effects we had in the 70s that changed everything aren't good enough now, and we have to pretend like it was always this way, and we have to throw all that away. I think that's bad for history, man.
I think it is too, and I think Lucas isn't giving this film enough credit because, personally, like I watched this film, it looks like an old film just because it's filmed on older film. It's a little bit grainier in the picture and stuff. I don't think the effects look dated. I think this is a timeless looking film. I wouldn't, if this was, Blu-ray HD quality, I don't know that I would say, like, if I didn't know the history of Star Wars, I don't know that I necessarily say, oh, this was definitely, filmed in the 70s because of the special effects and things. They're that good, I think.
Yeah, and also I think all that CG ruins the notion of this is supposed to be an old science fiction serial. Because for the most part, as they were innovating and creating these new special effects, they weren't doing a whole lot that couldn't have been done back then if people hadn't come up with it.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? I mean, like there's not a lot of digital work and stuff in 77. Actually, there's none of that in 77. So they had to be innovative and create new things, but how much of it, and of course I don't know a great deal about the production side, but just from what I've watched and read about, how much of it, had somebody thought of it in the 50s, couldn't have been made back then.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't. So what I'm saying is the effects are better, but only because they had the budget and the know-how to make them better. But to suddenly throw in a whole bunch of CG, it doesn't feel like the concept that they were going for.
Right, I agree with you
initially.
And the thing with this film is like the effects on this and basically everything that could have went wrong with the production side of this film went wrong. Lucas famously didn't want to direct the second or the third one when they got greenlit because he was so frustrated with making this one and the effects falling apart and things. So I think it's even more frustrating to look at Lucas as a director and look at this film that became so successful and the film that he put so much effort into, and him saying that the effects that he worked with that were falling apart and he made work really well, that wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
I just think he's selling himself short. Maybe that has something to do with the way the prequels were received or something. I don't know, but
and I also feel like like I said earlier, that there's a burying of history going on. We've got to be able to see each stage of this to really appreciate it. How are people supposed to have a historical sense of a historical perspective on really anything, be it film or be it literature or whatever if we don't see the stages of development.
Right, exactly. I agree with that 100%. And it wouldn't be that much of an issue if Lucas had made the regular versions of the films available, but they're not really all that available, other than the DVD you have and the original VHS tapes.
I never noticed this before. C-3PO looks like he's taking a bath.
Yes.
Which is hilarious.
Yes, it is.
There's a lot of fun, just little subtle things like that.
Yeah, and we talked over Luke Skywalker's introduction here.
Yes.
But I don't know about you, but he's my favorite Star Wars character, just because he's the one that's meant to be the most relatable, and I think it's effective in the same way that Peter Parker is sort of a relatable character. I actually think George Lucas parallels a lot of Marvel Comics things, and he's famously a big fan of Marvel and got Marvel
I didn't know that.
Star Wars at Marvel. Initially begged Stan Lee to do Star Wars comics at Marvel, so...
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, like, I don't know, if you look at a lot of the characters, like Darth Vader is Doctor Doom in space, Luke Skywalker is a lot like Peter Parker in the arc that he goes through. He starts out as a little kid and, becomes a fully fledged adult by the end. Not that, he goes through a journey to get there. He loses people, that sort of thing. He loses his mentor. So there's just a lot of parallels I've noticed. But, Marvel could be taking inspiration from some of the same things Lucas is taking inspiration from. Not that this is like a rip-off of Marvel Comics or anything, but...
Luke has famously always been talked about as being kind of the audience's in for the film, and I think that's really important and that's really smart. And again, something that the prequels were lacking. You've got this young human character. He's got goals and ambitions, and he's got people holding him back. His not his parents, but his
aunt and uncle.
He is a lot like Peter Parker, isn't he?
Yeah.
But yeah, he's got his aunt and his uncle. They're holding him back. He doesn't entirely understand why. It's kind of fun that we discover that. They're not actually entirely unsympathetic. His uncle isn't just this jerk that wants him to work on the family farm or whatever.
Yeah.
He's also afraid of him going out into the galaxy and becoming his father. All that kind of. This is all relatable stuff. This is all things that a lot of us have either experienced or know people who have experienced, or things that permeate the culture in other kinds of narrative.
Yeah, I love how naive Luke is in A New Hope, in just that. It's not that you have to throw exposition at him and explain everything. It's just that, he's got this wide-eyed look in the way he views everything in the film, and I find that to be really refreshing. When you have everyone else in this used world sort of just like, oh yeah, that happens here.
This is a science fantasy piece. It's also a basic traditional coming of age story.
Yes.
You've got the kid who sees that the world is a lot bigger than what he knows. We heighten that by making it the galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
And we've already seen some of it, but he's never been in space. And so, he reminds me, and I'm sure he might remind you of yourself a little bit. Just me, like in or right out of high school. I mean, this is like 18. This reminds me of 18-year-old me. I didn't want to stay in the town that I grew up in. I wanted to go out and see the world and live it, and that's all he wants to do.
Yeah, and I think this is around the time where you wake up and sort of realize how complicated the world is, and a lot of teenagers famously will, take a look at society and be like, everything with it is wrong and I need to change it, and they'll get really idealistic, and that's totally what Luke is here.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and he remains that way.
Yes, he does. And I think that's something that resonated especially with youth of the 70s, with all of the stuff, that was going on at that time. I mean, this came out in 77, 2 years after the Vietnam War had ended, but I think that was still on people's minds.
It was still on people's minds,
yeah.
Sure. And you still had plenty of Cold War stuff.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
People were worried about. I mean, obviously all the way until the wall dropped, you probably had plenty of kids thinking, boy, if only I could go out and stop the possibility of nuclear war.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And the Death Star is maybe the Star Wars version of that sort of thing, the weapon that will, that's in the hands of the bad guys that can destroy anything that you hold dear. It's sort of like nuclear weapons and that sort of thing. Not that they're making any sort of commentary about that, because the Rebels don't have a Death Star too that they like have a proxy war about, but
No, it's nothing like that.
right.
But yeah, it would have been really easy for this movie to get all wrapped up in we've got robots and we've got aliens, we've got spaceships, and make it all about this giant war. And we open that so we have a sense of the scope. We don't know yet that Luke Skywalker is already such a part of that, he doesn't even know it. So when we go here, we've grounded it now. I don't mean grounded it in reality. I mean we've grounded it in human ideas. We get to there and we go, oh, so this is just a kid that wants to go to college.
Right, exactly. And I think it's doing, the classic thing you want to do with an action-driven story is you want to have the characters, have the audience resonate with the characters and make you care about them, and then throw them in these big spectacular action scenes where you worry about them, and that's what brings you through. That's what makes it exciting, is when you have people in an action scene that you're invested in. And every action scene in this movie propels the story. Which I can't say for a lot of the action scenes in the prequels.
It's important that this doesn't feel entirely unfamiliar. That we just witnessed a conversation that a lot of us have probably had with our parents, or that some people have, and right. It feels real. It feels like something that really does happen. But then at the same time, we're surrounded by, there's two suns, and everything looks different.
Yeah, it's very easy to write things of the science fiction genre and anything that's not really set in the real world off as just sort of out there because it's in an unfamiliar setting. But I think people don't give the stories a chance in how grounded they are in human ideas. And Star Wars, I think, is one of the best examples of that. I think the characters are first and foremost why this resonated with people so hard. Because even with the world that they have here and the groundbreaking special effects and all of those sorts of things, if you don't have the characters propelling the story,
who cares?
Who cares, exactly.
And I think it's important to say that, again, these are certainly archetypes.
Yes, they are.
We're not. This is not a character study. We're not like. We're bringing these ideas up, and we're not, exploring these different kinds of morality all that hard, besides just the broader good versus evil. But what we're doing is we are creating these broad characters that we identify with because they remind us of us.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's what these sorts of things are supposed to do. There's something very parable-ish about Star Wars. We care about these characters. There is just enough there that does set them apart. I'm not just saying that they're completely static characters, but yet, you've seen Luke Skywalker before. You've seen Han Solo before.
Right, exactly. It's just that I think the performances help in making the characters come to life as well as they did. The casting of the triad, I suppose, of Star Wars.
Interesting.
Leia, Luke, and Han, I think it was just spot on. Mark Hamill plays the innocence of this character so well.
Yeah. It's important to note that different stories are told for different reasons, and that Star Wars is a melodrama, and it's supposed to be a melodrama. I'm not dogging Star Wars when I call it that. That's what it is.
Right. Yeah.
It's not deep character-driven fiction. That's not what it's supposed to be. It's an adventure serial, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's a mistake a lot of people make, is trying to overanalyze Star Wars.
Yeah, I think so too.
And I think the mistake I've seen a lot of expanded universe writers do is trying to write Star Wars as cutting-edge science fiction, where it's like, we've got to have these big, morality plays and science fiction ideas in Star Wars, where it's like, that's not really what it was meant to do in the first place.
No. I don't want to see, and that's why the prequels went too political, I thought.
Yeah.
They were trying. I'm not sure exactly what Lucas thought he was saying with them, with the politics there, but I do feel like he was trying to do some kind of broad social commentary, and it's just that's not what these were. I'm not saying that there's not commentary, but it's not it's not about current society. It's not social commentary. It's more basic human stuff. Like you said, this is a timeless film. This film will be as understandable 100 years from now as it is now, and I would wager if people could get themselves past the sciencey stuff, or the sciencey looking things, the robots and those sorts of things, that the ideas in this movie would have been understood, and the character arcs would have been understood in 1900.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think the dialogue helps a lot with that too. We're not speaking in 70s vernacular. We're not speaking in any sort of vernacular other than basic proper English.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and the fact that we're not setting this in the future of our galaxy, of our Earth, I think that adds another timeless quality to the film, in that we're not dating ourselves at all. Like, people, I mean, at the time, eugenics wars in the 1990s for Star Trek might have looked like something in the 60s that could have happened, but obviously that hasn't happened. Star Wars didn't try to date itself, and I think it was smart in that way.
Yeah, sure. But also, Star Trek was about that kind of thing.
Right, exactly.
It was looking ahead. It was the history of the future. Star Wars, you don't have to put Star Wars in a box and try to make it science fiction to somehow elevate it and make it better. Science fiction is about Earth. Generally, science fiction is Earth-centric, or at least is in a universe where Earth exists. We don't know if there's an Earth here. I think it's important to note that we've got human beings, and we're never told they're human beings. They're never called anything except for whatever the planet they're on, or they're from.
Right, exactly. And I think the fact that it's set a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away is very fitting, in that this takes place from our perspective in the past, and we're looking to the past and homaging it, but at the same time we're in a futuristic setting.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that before. I mean, like, I think some people might look at the long, long ago kind of thing and say, well, see, it's still in our universe. And I think that's, again, a little bit, maybe so, but also, I don't think it's important. I think that you're right. I think it's a little bit more of just an homage thing, saying, this movie is about nostalgia.
Yeah. and it's interesting that
we're celebrating the past at the same time as we're using this kind of modern sensibility of what futuristic technology might look like. But again, I think it's important to note that I don't think that they're trying to predict the future at all with Star Wars.
No, not at all. That's not what this is about at all. Isn't it interesting?
I mean, I think it's important to note that the Force is magic. That makes it a fantasy thing.
Yeah,
it's science fantasy. We have technology, but that makes it. It's not speculative fiction. Science fiction is speculative fiction. This is not that.
Exactly. And isn't it interesting that the more recent Star Wars films that tried to go more science fiction, while the more recent Star Trek films went more action driven?
Yeah, and neither is as good.
Right. It's just
they used to
me.
Yeah.
One is trying to be the other, and they could just be their own thing, and I would be perfectly fine with watching them separate.
And I love both.
Yeah.
Obviously, my sensibilities are more towards science fiction, but that's just partly because of my background and upbringing and things. I mean, like, I love both. People ask me all the time, why are you into one over the other? That's the reason. That's why I don't want one to turn into the other. We don't have to find a confluence of these two things. There's a reason we have them both.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just watching this scene of Luke lighting up the lightsaber for the first time, and the lightsaber is such a simple concept that you can't believe someone hadn't come up with it before.
Yeah, I know.
Like, I'm not sure if...
It's a sword of light.
Yeah. Like, even if it had been used before, Star Wars is definitely the thing that popularized it. I don't think there's any argument there. Just in the way it was so expertly marketed with the toys and everything like that. I mean, I've been whacking my friends with plastic lightsabers since I was 3 years old,
Imagine a world without that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting looking at a kid like Luke Skywalker and thinking about what it's like to grow up in kind of a darker world where everything's kind of against you, but still being all wide-eyed and wanting to take it on. Like, you don't know what life used to be like. This is all you know. And so, I mean, I know Luke Skywalker is, like, he's probably around 18, but like he's still got this childlike mentality. He's still basically a child, right? So at this point, at least in the context of these films, and so like a childlike mentality is going to give you this optimism that adults desperately need to get themselves out of this.
Right, and it's interesting that they parallel Luke and Leia in that way, that Leia is the same age as Luke, but she's been thrust into this really adult role, and she doesn't have the same amount of optimism that he has about everything. Like, she's fighting for this cause, but it's desperate for her, and it looks like they're going to lose. Whereas Luke is like, you know, if we try hard enough, maybe we'll win, and that sort of thing. And I think it's very telling as to why he's the one that Obi-Wan goes to first.
That's a good point.
Maybe not. I mean, Obi-Wan's living on the same planet as him, obviously, and watching over him. But I think that it's perfect. He's the perfect character to be chosen to be a Jedi because that optimism is already there in him.
Well, and also importantly, Obi-Wan doesn't actually go to Luke. Luke goes to him.
Right. True. But that was always Obi-Wan's plan from the beginning.
Yeah. Okay. But he didn't know. Or did he? I don't think he didn't know that she was going to get kidnapped right then.
Well, he knew what sort of family he was putting her into when she was given to the what's the name of the family? The Organas. But that's right. Prequel stuff that we wouldn't know.
Yeah, that's good. No,
the first time. So
that's a good point, though.
But I just think
you're right. She's got this really heavy life that he hasn't had to deal with yet. She has to deal with politics, and she has to deal with speaking to these really important people that she doesn't agree with, and that ultimately she's probably going to lose to. And then, of course, she's going to lose her whole planet.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's why she connects with Han Solo so much, because he's sort of a world-weary person too, whereas Luke is a little bit more of the eternal optimist between the three of them.
Yeah.
Like, they're both totally on opposite sides of the law, but they've both sort of experienced the worst that the galaxy has to offer, you know, in the corruption, as we can see here, corruption in politics with this scene here, with the Moff and the Imperials here. I always found it interesting in this scene here that we see Darth Vader being subservient to someone other than the Emperor. That's an idea that we never really address or have after this, because it's usually in Star Wars, in the expanded universe, and in the future films, it's the Emperor and then Vader, and everyone else is below them command-wise.
Well, the prequels make it out like Darth Vader is the be-all, end-all to everything.
Yeah, which I don't necessarily like.
And it doesn't fit with this.
Yeah.
Also, I always really liked that the Emperor is in the background here. We just he's talked about, I think, but we don't really know what he looks like or anything about him.
Right. We see a little glimpse of him in Empire, but you don't even see him in this movie.
Yep.
And that's another thing the special editions ruin, is in Empire he was sort of shrouded in shadow and you couldn't really see what his face looked like, and then in the special editions it's like full on, we can see exactly what the Emperor looks like. It sort of kills the mystique for me.
It's hard to believe that Darth Vader is capable of just going around and choking people like this, and everybody doesn't believe in his quote-unquote ancient religion.
Yeah, that is very true.
I guess he must just not demonstrate that ability very often.
And that's something that I really want to talk about I think the Jedi Force and lightsabers, if you notice, are used very, very sparingly in the original trilogy, and when they're used, they're awesome. In the prequels, Yoda's jumping around doing flips for like 20 minutes, and it's not cool, it just looks goofy because that's what the whole movie was before. I don't know, like, I think their lack of special effects here actually helped them in making the lightsaber duels look a little bit more, like actual sword fights and have stakes and things like that. I don't know. Like, the writing around the fights is obviously better, where we have emotional resonance, especially with the fight we'll see at the end of this film with Ben and Vader. But I don't know. I just think we got too much Jedi jumping around being superheroes in the prequels, whereas when it's used here, it's sort of like Hulk in the Avengers, where, you know, you see him every so often and he's cool. They give you just enough.
It also helps the Force to mean something.
Exactly.
When we get into the second one, which if we keep doing these, obviously we'll talk about, Yoda clearly has a very specific worldview, and he's very pulled back. He's not showing off all the time.
Right.
And I don't get the sense that even in his younger days he would have been showing off all the time. He's a wise sage. It doesn't make sense to just use your powers because you can and because it looks cool. Exactly. These movies were kind of about the opposite of that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's sort of contrary to the Jedi philosophy, really. And one of the things I wanted to mention when we were talking about Vader before was a lot of people don't realize that, you know, the Sith, like the opposite of the Jedi as we know them now, that is an expanded universe thing. That term wasn't even invented by George Lucas, I don't think, because it's never mentioned in the original trilogy, and then they start saying it in the prequels like we're supposed to have known it the whole time. And if you've never read any expanded universe and you go into that movie, you're Phantom Menace, you're just kind of like, well, what is a Sith? They're just kind of like Jedi with red lightsabers and evil in the original trilogy.
And why would they never mention them here?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I like the Sith culture they've developed into something really interesting through, you know, the expanded universe and stuff like that, but I just think it's sort of odd that idea was played up so hard in the prequels when it was never in these movies at all.
Wow, that's ominous, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
When the door closes behind Vader, when he's standing there with Leia and trying to inject her with something, and the door closes behind him, and you don't know what happens. Like, that's ominous.
It's such a good cut and shot. It's appalling to me that this film is so well directed. Looking at the prequels, you know. I mean, yeah. This is a well directed film. Like, the actors are all giving great performances. We're not, you know, getting the wooden performance we got from Hayden Christensen in, you know, the prequel films, because, you know, I've seen that guy act in good things before. It just takes, you know, a good director to get him to act sometimes.
I was talking about the brilliance of this film's simplicity earlier. Again, good storytelling is not always about just being as complicated as you can to make me think that you're an impressive writer by throwing so many things at me that I can't actually think about what you're trying to tell me. When I understand people's motivations and what they're doing, it can be this simple and still be very compelling. Luke Skywalker will come right out and tell you what he wants as a character. The stories are about characters wanting something, going to try to get them, and then seeing a character arc propelling through their attempt at gaining that, and then whether they get it or whether they don't tells you, and how that all happens, tells you something about them. Luke Skywalker will come right out and say, this is what I want. And it's not weird and silly and jarring and bad exposition, because human beings do this. We do vocalize what it is we want. And at various points, Luke Skywalker does this through the film. At the beginning, it's, I just want to go to college. Then his aunt and uncle die, and now that's changed, and now it's something else. This film has a really good sense of basic storytelling, which sounds like an easy thing, but so many people get that wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of the things people don't realize about these movies, too, the original trilogy especially, is although George Lucas did direct the first film, and he had an idea for episodes 4, 5, and 6, and presumably all the other ones that he said since, these scripts were, like, what we're seeing on film is not Lucas's, you know, final draft. Like, it was rewritten by other people.
Yeah.
So this is not 100% Lucas dialogue here. Lucas gets a lot of the credit for. I mean, rightly so. He's the guy that created the universe. He should get credit for the thing he created here. But I'm just saying, we should talk a little bit about. I think when we talk about these films, the other writers who worked on them, and I think if you look at a lot of the other things Lucas has written, thank God,
yeah,
they went over and did different drafts and stuff. Because like Dark Horse is actually adapting Lucas's original script into a comic book, and like Han Solo was like a three-eyed alien in it, and it's just very different. And here's the cantina scene, one of the most famous and homaged scenes since in science things set in space history.
It's only because this music is so catchy.
Oh, it's great, isn't it? And would you believe I know the species of band that plays in the cantina? They are Biff.
All right.
I really like the all the designs for the aliens in the cantina here. It's so cool. It gives you a great scope, what we were talking about before. A galaxy that exists with all these races has to be gigantic, you know?
That's one of the reasons that I never got into Star Wars as hard as I did other things, especially Trek, just because it was always strange to me that, and I think off-putting when I talk to other people that were big into Star Wars, that there's all of this lore that's not in the film. You know what I mean? So yeah, all these people have names and all these races have race names, but they're never mentioned in the actual material. And original series had that to a degree too with Star Trek. Not as much, but I mean, like I've gone back and looked at old books where you'll see something that is somewhat recognizable, but they never named, and then suddenly it's got a name, and I'm like, well, who cares? Because you didn't actually use that.
Right.
So and it's hard for me to care when it's not actually in the thing.
And that's one of the mistakes Lucas will make in the prequels, where he has characters that stand around in the background and have names, and then he'll have them do things like their main characters in the movie. Like Mace Windu becomes a character all of a sudden in Attack of the Clones. And not that they do anything with his character, but he just kind of like stands in the background before that, and you don't really know what his name is.
Yeah, and he's got all this dialogue all of a sudden. You're like, who's that guy? Why is he important?
Yeah, exactly. And Lucas thought that, if you just make a guy look cool, then, people will care about him. And, fair enough. I mean, Darth Maul looks really cool.
So is there some reason that Obi-Wan's force powers didn't work on that guy?
Probably an alien thing, I would imagine, but it's never explained in the movie. Some alien races are resistant to Jedi mind tricks and things like that.
Well, and of course we get that in episode 1, but I was just wondering if that was supposed to be that idea there, or if anybody knows.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. And there's that.
Boy, that's creepy. The person standing there at the bar with the long hose that he's smoking out of.
Yeah. I love
That's funny. There's a little bit of an edge to this.
There is. It's very dirty.
By the way, this here, not in the theatrical cut. That's all just random.
Yeah.
Like, there's no reason to put that back in either.
Wait till we get to Jedi and the, dancer song number that they put in Jabba's palace. It's awful.
Yeah.
And this is our introduction to Han Solo, who is right behind Luke Skywalker as one of my favorite things. I think Han Solo is so much fun. And
I was never a giant fan of Han Solo, but I like Harrison Ford as an actor.
Yeah, and he makes this character. Like, Disney had talked, there was rumors flying around that they might do a solo Han Solo movie.
I love that you put yourself in a place where you had to say that.
Yeah. And
I don't. Do you want that?
I don't want them to recast Han Solo, dude. I just don't want to see that. To me, Han Solo is Harrison Ford. Same thing with Luke and Leia too. I just don't want them to recast those characters. If you want to have them come in as older versions of themselves, that's fine. But I just resist that idea.
I agree with you. I think there's characters you could recast, but I wouldn't want to do that to them.
Right. Exactly.
Most of the people I'm thinking of that you could recast are just wearing helmets or
like Boba Fett,
or in big giant costumes.
Yeah, exactly.
That kind of thing.
And we'll get to the famous Han shot first controversy scene in the cantina in a few minutes.
Yeah, and I understand why that bothers people, because it's a character thing.
I understand it too.
But it's funny because from what you're saying, you saw it this way first.
I did see it this way first, and it looks so weird. You can almost tell that something was changed. It looks so bad.
Well, I don't want to keep belaboring the same point. I still just don't see any reason to change all that stuff.
Yeah, me either.
And, this version seems a little bit less irritating than some of the things I've heard about from the more recent remake, where they just keep shoving stuff in.
Yeah, I've heard the Blu-rays are a little bit worse. And believe it or not, they made action figures of Greedo. I had one.
Oh, yeah. But see, that makes a little bit of sense, because he at least has dialogue in the film.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I had action figures of characters who didn't talk, too.
Sure, yeah. Like, there's that one, like, big lizard-looking guy that sort of looks like a Gorn. Oh. I think in the third one.
Oh, Bossick, yes.
Yeah, they made an action figure of that guy.
Yeah, he stands around in the background in Jedi when Darth Vader calls all the bounty hunters.
If you blink, you miss him.
Yeah.
Oh, is that where he is? Okay.
Yeah, he is. See, did you just see that little twitch there that looked really unnatural?
It did. I love that the white snowy looking alien like scratches his head. Huh.
That's one of my favorite Han Solo lines. Sorry about the mess. I love that.
And then you get the sense that that's probably not that unusual. I love how enormous the Death Star is.
Oh, I love it too.
At any point, you might only see a small corner of it while you're looking at various spaceships flying.
Yeah.
Looks really good. And that stuff all holds up really well.
Oh, it does. See, I love Peter Cushing as Tarkin here. I think he's great. I think he could have easily played the Emperor in this movie and been awesome, but I like that we save the Emperor for later. Like we had talked about
interesting.
before.
I wouldn't have thought of that. But you're right, yeah. He's old enough to play him, and...
Yeah.
Actually, come to think of it, he's quite a bit older.
Yeah, he is, and...
Because the guy who actually plays the Emperor, I forget his name, he's playing younger. I mean, he's younger and playing older.
Yes, he is.
Otherwise, he wouldn't have still been around for episode 1.
Right, yeah.
I do think it's cool that they were able to use the same actor for all of that.
That is very cool.
I mean, even if I didn't care for some of what they did with him in the prequels, it is kind of neat that he kind of got older and then just looked like that, so it was okay.
Right, yeah. I think it's cool that Lucas used Peter Cushing because he's a big fan of the Hammer horror movies, and that's why Christopher Lee was Count Dooku in the prequels, too.
Yeah.
Because he's a big fan of those movies. Interesting that he got the two biggest actors from those movies, one in each saga. That must have been pretty cool for him.
That is cool. What's also cool is that Christopher Lee, by then, was, of course, actually big enough to play in movies like this.
Yeah. And I really don't like CGI.
Well, I mean, obviously, people from Hammer would have been. I'm just saying that, like, I've seen Christopher Lee in lots of weird B movies and things.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I just don't like this. I don't think it looks good.
It doesn't look good. This
Jabba.
was originally a deleted scene, and they throw Boba Fett in here, which is weird because his first appearance was originally in Empire, and it's just, I don't know, it's weird for me to just see him standing around in the background here. Which is, kind of what he does in Empire anyway, but...
I don't mean to just look at everything that I can tell is new and say this is bad. I don't mean to do that. It's just a lot of it I don't care for. And it's also not it's not a purist thing, except that I do think there's no reason to mess with it. But what do these things add? And I think it's important to ask that question. I think I've always thought this kind of weighs things down a little bit, messes with the pacing. Did we really need to see them arguing about percentages here? I mean, like, I think this is a scene that should have been cut.
Yeah, it's almost like Lucas is saying, like, oh, it's Star Wars, people won't care, they just want more of it, even if it's just nothing, really. We're not really propelling the story forward here, and I think that kind of ruins the reveal of what Jabba the Hutt looks like in Return of the Jedi, because it's the same sort of thing with the Emperor. Like, Luke's archenemy, you don't see him till the last movie in full, and same thing with Han Solo's archenemy.
I didn't think of it like that. That's great. It's a good point, yeah.
They just kill the reveal. I don't know.
And they wanted to do it just because they couldn't get him to move right the first time, but I would argue that it looks kind of clunky now.
Yeah. I think the animatronic Jabba looks much better than that.
But yeah, I mean, like, all that scene did was say, okay, they've argued about percentages, and then that tells us about how, later he's supposed to deliver on that. But I mean, like, we don't need that scene to be told that. I understood what Han Solo owed Jabba with the Millennium Falcon all the way through this without that scene.
Right, exactly. It's just a scene that gives us information we already had, and it goes on too long.
I'm still thinking about the Lego games, man. I got so sick of all those stormtroopers coming at me when I was trying to get into the Falcon. Just like,
I know, right?
Stop coming at me!
Oh.
And these giant, these giant sci-fi things always have to have their own version of chess, man.
Yes, they do.
And of course, I mean, in original series, we have the really this is interesting. This is a great metaphor, okay? So in original series, we've got three-dimensional chess, right? Like, it's really complicated. It's a really thinking thing, and like we're making things more complex in the future. You go to Star Wars, it's a circle, and it's holograms freaking killing each other.
And you've got them talking about things like the card game Pazak later on, and that's a card game that they will invent in video games and stuff you can actually play, but it's the same thing with like hyperdrive and stuff where it's just like buzzwords for things, where it's like Star Trek would actually, come up with the game within the context of the series and stuff.
Yeah. But again, that's not one against the other.
Right, exactly. It's just they're trying to accomplish two completely different things.
Yeah, but and here's what's different about it, okay? Star Trek will take warp drive, say, and will use the scientific mechanics that are loosely created out of real science to tell us this is how this would kind of work, and then we use that for plot stuff. I mean, you get episodes like TNG where where warp drive is actually ruining somebody's space. And you can't go past a certain warp anymore, and we were using that to discuss pollution and stuff like that. In this, it's just we need it to get somewhere.
Right, exactly.
You don't have to talk about how it works because it's a device used to get from place to place. It's not about the technology. I mean, the story is not about the technology.
Right, exactly. Agreed, 100%. And that's. People just label Star Wars as science fiction because it's set in space, which is a mistake.
Science fantasy was already its own thing.
Yeah, and I think that's why some people try to overanalyze Star Wars, because you immediately associate science fiction with highbrow, intelligent things most of the time.
I just noticed something I'd never caught before.
Yeah.
Princess Leia seems like she gets a little bit of a British accent whenever she's talking to British people.
Oh yeah, she does.
I'm listening to this, and all the way through this scene, she's got a little bit of a twinge.
I think Carrie Fisher's of the three main characters here, I think she's the one that's the least comfortable in her role here, from what I can tell. I think Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill are the spitting image of their characters from scene one. I think she really comes into her own in Empire and is really comfortable. Maybe it's just because Leia doesn't have as much to do here, in that she's just like not the damsel in distress, because she actually does shoot people and is competent, even more competent than Luke sometimes. But
yeah, sure.
She's just kind of typical, and she doesn't really have all that much of a character arc when you compare it to the other two characters, really.
Well, and I can also see how Carrie Fisher might have been a little bit unsure of how to play that starting out, because I mean, this does kind of come across as a fun movie for little boys to watch, and she's like the girl in it.
Yeah, that's true.
I always wondered if that didn't factor in a little bit, but nothing against her performance. I think she's doing as good of a job as she can, not knowing where things are going.
Right. Exactly.
But clearly, she came much more in her own in Empire, just like you said.
Oh yeah, for sure. I still love Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan, even though
he apparently
didn't like doing this.
That's sad.
Yeah, it is sad. I don't even know if because he passed away relatively recently after the film came out too. So I don't even know if he was around to witness how culturally relevant it became. But it'd be interesting to know.
Well, he had to have seen some of that because he's in Empire.
Yeah, very true. And he's in Jedi too.
So I mean, like,
he definitely did.
Definitely saw that. I mean, like, it wasn't like these weren't successful until there was a trilogy. Like,
right,
it was pretty huge in '77.
Yeah, I mean, it was huge, but like, I don't think anyone would have predicted that it would have been huge beyond, you know, the way most things are huge, where they're like popular movies that year and they make a lot of money, and then.
Oh no, I see what you're saying. Yeah,
you know what I'm saying.
He didn't know there was a whole giant franchise built around it.
Right, because, you know, nobody did at that point. I think it's important to have these scenes training with the Force and sort of explaining. That's the one thing that I think we need to explain how that works, because it's so integral to the story. It's important that it spends time on sort of explaining how the Jedi use it and that sort of thing. I love this conversation as well between Solo, Obi-Wan, and Luke.
It's one of those things where, again, we're not doing social commentary about specific religions. We just build in religion because that's a part of the human experience for most people in some capacity right now.
Right, and we're having that, you know, typical moment for a kid when you're growing up where you're like, I've been taught this religion by authority figures, and then there's these other people that are like around the same age as me totally rejecting it. How do I reconcile the things that I may have seen that are contrary to that religion in my life versus what I'm being told, and that sort of thing. Just in one simple scene, he's encapsulating that experience.
And you're seeing these three totally different views on it.
Right, exactly.
I mean, it's important.
Luke's sort of the moderate between the two of them.
Yeah, it's important you've got Han Solo sitting there saying, well, you know, I'm basing everything on personal experience, and all I can trust is myself.
Yeah.
And that's the rogue archetype, you know. I trust me, and that's what I trust.
And he has every reason to, as well.
Yeah, sure.
That's what I love about his character. He's so self-assured, but, like, he has a reason to be, you know? I mean, he's a flawed guy, but, like, you know, he's as good as a pilot as he thinks he is. The set design in these movies is something that I think should not be missed. I'm just looking at the design of this room and how evil it looks. Just even down to the chairs with the gouges in them and the way they're slanted upwards like horns and.
Oh yeah, it's like just in case you weren't sure, there is nothing altruistic about the Empire. Yeah,
it's great stuff.
Well, and I mean, like, for other sorts of projects, that would be overkill. Yeah, it'd be going too far. Like, you can't really get away with going that far in Star Trek. That's what's fun about these is that they can get away with some overstatement like that. It is that larger than life. It's not realistic. It doesn't want to be that. And I don't want it to be that.
Exactly. I think the important thing with Star Wars is that it's consistent.
Yes. Sure.
If it had been the sort of thing where we had scenes like that and then had other things where it's not as black and white, it would have been strange. I mean, Tatooine's sort of like that because I think it's supposed to be neutral. Luke is starting out there, and he hasn't chosen an alignment yet. And we go to places that, you know, sort of represent, you know, the situation that he's in, and the rebels are in an empire where Hoth is sort of desolate, cold. where they're discovered and almost killed and stuff like that. So the planets that Lucas and company are using here, I think, are serving the story, which everything in the film should serve the story, which I think these films do a good job of that.
When you're making something escapist like this, you've got to make your characters relatable so that we're invested, but you also don't want to get so heavy that we get reminded too much of all the annoying, sad, crazy crap in our real lives that we came here to avoid.
Right.
That we came here to get away from. So, I mean, it's not that we're not discussing anything real, but at the same time, we want to, if we're enjoying this, we want to live in their universe for a while because it's a little simpler than ours. Even though they have these, stories are about conflict, so bad things have to happen to people, but, there's black and there's white. There's this evil empire, and then the rebels are better than that, and so they're good, and so it's fun to get to just live there for a minute, and then you come to your real life and you go, oh yeah, things aren't that black and white.
Right, because sometimes in the real world you don't know who the bad guys are, who the good guys are, and films like this, like you said, are refreshing because it clearly identifies them, and you can say he's the bad guy just by looking at them.
Yeah, and again, it's not asking us to turn our brains off, because when I use my brain, I go, oh, all this is consistent. Like you said, there's an internal logic. I don't think that movies like this are trying to pretend like the world is not the way that it really is.
No,
I think that they are creating a different one.
Yeah, exactly. It goes back to the thing you were saying before about being familiar and different at the same time. Familiar in the human things and in the way we feel about situations that may be similar that happen here, but different in that it's in a completely different context.
Yeah, it's entirely alien. I've heard some people that don't care for Star Wars. Not that there are a whole lot of those, but you're like really, really pretentious critics that don't like stuff like this because it's not real enough. I watched a video the other day. It's interesting that we just happen to be doing this. I watched a video the other day from '82 with Siskel and Ebert trying to defend Star Wars against this really, really pretentious critic that hated Star Wars.
Really?
Because he said that it was too much like a cartoon, and that it was too dumbed down for children, and that it wasn't about real people. And when he called it a cartoon, I said, why is that bad?
Yeah, exactly.
And then he said, this feels like something Disney should be making, which is hilarious now, right? But he said this feels like something Disney would have made in the 40s or whatever. And Ebert and Siskel both came back at him and said, no, this is just what Disney should be making.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny that they were saying that back in '82? But like they were saying, no, this is good entertainment for children, and there's something here for adults as well, but that's what I like about it or one of the things I like about it is that, it is for kids, sure.
It's the perfect example of all ages entertainment, I think. Well, a lot of we talk all the time about how comic books struggle with walking that line.
Oh, yeah.
Star Wars is a thing where, you look at it, and it walks that line pitch perfect.
Well, it's crazy some of the adult things that really are subtly implanted in there. Remember I mentioned the guy smoking at the bar.
Yeah, and all the people drinking.
Wow.
Yeah, and the fact that they don't serve droids at the bar, they're kind of prejudiced and stuff like that.
I wanted to mention that the whole idea of being prejudiced against droids was fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
Watching this when I was a kid. Again, because I was a big Star Trek fan, and they do the same thing in Next Generation with Data, except that there's all this exploration about, he doesn't have emotions, so does that mean that he's not a person? Here, we've got all these droids that have emotions and clearly seem to be able to experience the full range of human. They're treated like slaves, and it's never addressed.
Yeah, it's just sort of there. Like we had said, it's not about exploring those sorts of ideas.
It's part of this universe. I'm not saying that they couldn't do something with it.
Right, exactly.
Maybe. I'm not sure if I would want to see that. I'm not sure if I would necessarily want to see like a big a big droid.
We're gonna do a C-3PO solo film where we explore the racism of droids in the Star Wars universe. That would be. I'm not sure what that would be.
that would just make it something different entirely.
Yeah.
You know?
In the words of C-3PO, we're doomed.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I need that.
No, me either.
Is there much expanded universe that tries stuff like that goes for like huge political commentary, trying to parallel things that are going on in the real world and make some kind of discussion about it?
There are things, yeah. Most of the expanded universe I read came around the time that I was eating and sleeping Star Wars as a kid, when I was reading all those novels, checking them out from the library. So I haven't revisited them in a long time, but I remember there being some things like that where they were, talking about technology and alien races that were representative of things in society and stuff. And it wasn't really about, using the characters and things like that. And I think the trouble with doing expanded universe with these characters is the archetype character arcs that are so familiar and so much fun already played out in the movies. So
yeah,
where do you go after that? That's gonna be as much fun. There's things done in the Thrawn trilogy of books, which were the first expanded universe things ever made, which are very good at sort of doing the same character arc for all the characters, but through a different lens of that they've already learned those things. It's really interesting in the way they do it.
I hear about that so much. I have got to just finally sit down and read that.
Oh, you really like it, I think, because Thrawn is very Khan-like in his villainy. He's calculating, and him and Luke really don't see each other, but they're sort of they're never in the same room together for a good majority of the books, but they're always sort of chasing each other around and stuff like that. It's very cool. Thrawn's one of my
awesome.
Yeah, Thrawn is one of my favorite Star Wars villains that wasn't in the movies. I really like him. He's
my favorite thing is calculating, manipulative villains that do things behind the scenes and nobody knows about it till it's too late. That's the best. That's just the best.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's able to manipulate Sith Lords and...
That's why I'm such a giant Lex Luthor fan. I feel like they tried some of that with the Emperor in 3, and it just wasn't subtle enough.
No, it wasn't. I mean, there was things where he was manipulating the rebels, giving them false information about the shield generator and stuff like that, but they never really played him up to be any sort of big mastermind, really.
Well, I felt like they were trying to play him up as that, and it just didn't work.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, he takes over a republic and kind of sets himself up as dictator, but then they sort of act like he's all conniving and intelligent, and nobody knows really what he's doing, and I don't know. It just seemed really obvious to anybody looking on the outside. Well, that guy's evil. Just look at that guy.
You're talking about in the prequels?
Yeah, I'm talking about the prequels.
Oh, I thought you said in 6.
No, I said 3.
Oh, okay. I thought you said 6.
No, I'm sorry. I said 3. But anyway,
yeah, I agree. I agree about 3. I agree about in 1, 2.
No. I don't think he was doing that in 6. I just mean in 3 with the whole. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I agree 100%.
When he takes over the government.
Yes.
Yeah.
From scene 1, when that guy shows up, you're like, okay, well, what's up with this guy?
Yeah, he's clearly trying to change your entire way of life right in front of your nose. It's
He tells Anakin a story about an ancient Sith Lord. I wonder who the Sith Lord in the Senate could be.
A vote of no confidence.
These scenes with them in the Stormtrooper costumes are so much fun.
Yeah, I think so too. That's another classic kind of sci-fi serial trope. The disguise.
Oh yes.
And they use that all the way through these.
Yeah, they do.
I want to say we've got some sort of disguise with a main character in every one of these.
I think that's right.
I mean, I know there's a big one in 6.
Yeah, you've got the one with.
Yeah, but what are they doing in I'm sorry, Jedi?
Jedi is 6.
I'm sorry, what do they do in Empire?
I'm trying to remember. I mean, the Empire sort of.
I just watched that recently.
I mean, the Empire sort of like comes in and takes over Lando's operation incognito, I suppose.
I guess there's that, but that's not. I just mean like a person
disguise.
puts on a costume and walks into a room.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there is one, maybe not. But you're right. Almost with Vader, you sort of get that.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe there's not one.
And Darth Vader is a character that I don't think you can underestimate the iconography of him.
Oh Lord, no.
I read something online where they did a study, and he ended up being the most recognizable fictional character in the world. Like the most.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
He is the most recognizable fictional character among people in the world, which is very telling of just how much Star Wars has become a thing in our culture.
By the way, this is one of my favorite scenes.
Yeah.
Han Solo pretending to be a stormtrooper. It's really funny. We're fine here. How are you?
He totally doesn't know how to like serve anybody. You know what I mean? That's the hilarious thing about it.
I know anybody who really knows Star Wars that's listening to this is going to facepalm when I ask you this question.
Sure.
But again, I just don't know things. Would you clear something up for me, Dan?
Sure.
According to everything after we got the prequels, are stormtroopers still clones or not?
The explanation that has been given in Expanded Universe is they still have some clones left that haven't died in the Clone Wars, but they did recruit other people to be stormtroopers after. So they're sort of mixed in.
Okay, because if not, I always thought about this after watching those. I was like, well, if they were all clones, then they would immediately know Han Solo wasn't a stormtrooper.
Right.
Because his voice would be different. And clearly, these movies didn't think they were clones.
No, they don't at all. And in fact, I think some of the stormtroopers have different voices down the line, if I remember correctly. Like there's.
Do we ever see stormtroopers with their helmets off?
No, we don't.
Ever? Really?
Don't think so.
Okay. I don't remember either. I don't know why, but I always get thrilled just listening to Darth Vader plotting.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, just like, oh, and they're here, and now we're going to do this. And, like, those scenes could be boring, but they're not.
Everything about that character, I mean, James Earl Jones they couldn't have got a better guy to do the voice. I mean, thank God they got someone other than the guy who played him, because he has this really thick European accent. I can't remember what country he's from, but you can watch the original film takes, and he actually speaks all of Vader's dialogue, and it's really funny.
That's cool. Yeah, that's cool. But that's probably the best way to do that.
Oh yeah, exactly.
So you get it all timed right. I mean, you could have somebody behind him reading it.
Mm-hmm.
Unless they actually thought they were going to use that, but surely, even if it was going to be the same guy, you'd still have to ADR all that. He's wearing a helmet.
Right. I just think it's really funny where, like, especially like the opening scene, he's like, "Tear this ship apart." Things like that.
I want them alive!
And I like that we're sort of doing the archetypes of the characters here, in that we have a damsel in distress, but she's also able to defend herself, and we're sort of at least beginning to turn these archetypes on their head. The Empire goes much, much further with that, obviously.
That's a great point, though. Yeah, and like I said, like modernizing the series.
Exactly, yeah. Because obviously, 60s and 70s, this is empowerment for women time.
Yeah, I mean, we can do it in subtle ways. We don't have to make a big, huge deal out of it.
No.
But that's what I've always felt about this sort of thing, where you don't make a movie about look, women are empowered. No, you just empower them and then don't talk about it, right?
Joss Whedon
That's what Whedon did. Yeah, just have a girl with a gun shooting people, and look, she's as brave as Han Solo is. Because that's her character. It doesn't matter what gender she is.
Exactly. Whedon, I think one of the best things I heard him say about the female characters is doing exactly what he had said. He had said, don't make a point the fact that she's a girl. Just have her do heroic things and make you sympathize with like any other character.
It's actually really simple.
Yeah. just
to a certain degree. Now, this clearly is not wholly true.
Yeah.
Because obviously there are differences in how people's backgrounds and things because of where they're from and who they are, and gender plays into things. But like, to a certain degree, I kind of think when guys write women, they ought to just write how they would write and not think so much about the fact that they're women.
Right. I mean, obviously, yeah, there's going to be some psychological differences between a man and a woman, but they're not going to be so drastic that you can't write them like just regular human beings. Like,
otherwise you just make a big point about things and you're not actually telling stories.
Right.
And you're not doing it believably. And by the way, when I was a kid, this garbage chute scene scared the crap out of me.
Oh, I don't blame you.
I found this terrifying. This is probably the single most memorable scene of the film for me because of that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't blame you. This was one of the scenes that I thought was a little bit, darker, I suppose, than some of the other stuff in the film. Just because we have Luke almost drowning and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, not only do we have this creature under the water, but then here after a while, the walls are going to cave in on us, too. And just like, it's a death trap, and it's terrifying. And I love these sorts of death traps where, like, it wasn't intended as a death trap, but if somebody got stuck in there, it totally would be. These kind of practical death traps.
Yeah, exactly. It's doing the sort of, like, thing the Batman 60s TV show would make fun of, where, like, the Superman...
Just what I was thinking!
Yeah, they'll show up with this elaborate death trap already planned. We're like, look, I have a giant fly swatter about to kill you while you're tied up, and, like, we have one here on the Death Star. The villain has a death trap on the Death Star. But
keep in mind that if this was an actual serial, we would probably stop and make you come back next week right about here.
Yes.
Or we'd pause it and there'd be an announcer that would be like, will they make it out of here alive? Will that creepy thing with the eyeball drown Luke Skywalker anyway?
That'd be
Could this copper tubing possibly hold?
Imagine if that was the thing that saved him.
Wow, this thing is actually really durable. Holy crap!
Han Solo's like, I told you, I do make my own luck.
It's like I knew it was gonna hold the whole time. I love death traps, and yes, and cliffhangers like that. I mean, that is what 60s Batman was doing. It was also riffing on those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Everybody wanted to do their own thing with the serials because they had this really interesting, distinct kind of thing to them because most of it was because of format. Most of it was because you came this week to watch a chapter and then you come in next week to watch a chapter, and that is fascinating after the fact.
Yeah, that's why I think it's when we were talking about the comic book influence in this film, I think it's not very hard to believe at all that Lucas would be inspired by serials and comics at the same time, because serials are just kind of like, comic books on film in that they're sequential storytelling.
Yeah, and you've got cliffhangers, and you got to come back next month or next week or whatever, and yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I think it's important. Now, I could be stretching, Dan. I could totally be stretching when I say this, but it might be true that they cut where they cut there on purpose, because, like, we have already had a lot of scenes where we cut and then we come back to what we were doing before, but is it possible that that they specifically made sure to cut right as the doors were closing and then go off on some other stuff and then come back so that it feels like a cliffhanger even though we don't get to serialize it?
I wouldn't be surprised.
I mean, you wanna build up suspense like that, right? So that your audience is going the whole time all those other things are going on. That was a good 2 or 3 minutes, right? I mean, the whole time the audience is sitting there thinking, if we're invested, we're thinking, oh, those walls are still closing in.
Yeah, I mean, and even though we don't have to wait till next week to see the reveal, I think it works just as effectively.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So
I'm
with
I felt
you.
myself doing that even just here, thinking, oh yeah, those walls are still caving in, right?
I love Mark Hamill's reaction there.
I think Mark Hamill, through a lot of this performance, has to restrain himself a little bit. I don't think, until you get into some of his later work, I don't think anybody realized what kind of a ball of energy that guy is.
Oh, yeah, you see him in interviews, and he is just on level 11 all the time with how much energy he has.
Yeah.
And
Dan, if you've never seen it, go watch his episodes of the early 90s Flash TV show, which he did just before he was voicing the Joker.
And he was the trickster, right?
The trickster in that. And he's just nuts. He's jumping around everywhere, and he's basically using that a similar voice, which actually is not why he got the Joker, but it's weird because Shirley Walker also did the music for that. So this is weird thing. But yeah, like the guy's nuts. He's always jumping around, and
yeah, I think Mark Hamill was a perfect choice for this role because this is so similar, like we had said, to comic book storytelling. I don't know if you know this, but Mark Hamill is the biggest comic book fan in the world.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I knew that.
He is like an encyclopedia about comics. Like, he knows everything. I've heard interviews with him. Kevin Smith interviewed him on his Batman podcast, and they just had like a really long conversation, not just about Batman, but just like comics in general. And he like knew stuff about like Archie, going back to like the original stuff, like obscure like 40s comics I'd never even heard of. Like, the guy is a big comic book fan. So this was definitely right up his alley, I would imagine, with things you would have wanted to play.
Well, and he, of everybody here, looks the most comfortable.
Yes, he does. I agree. Harrison Ford in the Han Solo role, I've heard Harrison Ford say multiple times that he didn't like playing that role. He wished he was killed off in Jedi, and he felt like he didn't really like Lucas's scripts. He had always said that you don't read a Lucas script, or you don't act a Lucas script, you read it, or something to that effect, where, like, he said you have to try really hard to make Lucas dialogue feel organic.
Wow.
So, yeah, Ford was not always the biggest fan of the roles that Lucas had given him, which is ironic because they're kind of the two things that defined his career.
Well, and a lot of this dialogue certainly doesn't sound like realistic, natural dialogue. Neither did sci-fi serials. They're going to speak somewhat of a different kind of lingo. Well, and lingo's the wrong word, because like you said, it's timeless. We're speaking in plain English.
Right, exactly. I just love...
That's always funny.
I love when Han Solo just runs into that crowd of stormtroopers. It makes me laugh every time.
Dan, I think you need Han Solo's belt. I think you should just wear that regularly.
Oh, I would love it. I'll get Norman Osborn's haircut. I'll get that belt.
Yeah.
I'll be all set.
And then you could have, and then you could also have web shooters.
I would be Goblin Solo Man.
We'll work on the name. We'll work on that. You could have a pocket for everything. You wouldn't even have to carry around like a wallet anymore. You know, you just like a driver's license is over here, and you have like a Swiss Army knife,
and pumpkin bombs.
your grocery store card, it's like everything is like.
And there's the scream, the Wilhelm scream that Lucas uses here.
Yeah.
And I don't remember if it's used in Empire or any place, but I know it's used in Jedi on the Jabba's sail barge scene.
Well, it's just such a good scream, Dan.
It is. And have you actually ever seen the original scene that takes place in, like where the guy actually screams?
No.
The first time it's ever used? Oh, it's hilarious. You should check it out sometime.
Oh, okay. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, I guess it's like from this Western movie, and it's like an iconic, like, goofy scream that everyone uses when they homage it. It's used in a ton of movies.
So you just steal it and throw it in there?
Yeah, it's awesome. Every so often I'll go to the theater and I'm like, oh, there's the Wilhelm scream. Awesome.
They're still doing it?
Oh yeah, all the time. It's not just Star Wars, it's all over the place.
50 years later, we're still using that scream.
Yeah.
So, obviously, Dan and I are mentioning quite a few things from the prequels, because I don't think we're going to do commentaries on those, are we, Dan?
I wouldn't like to.
we hadn't been planning on it. So I'll mention this, too. I really, watching these, I just don't buy that Anakin Skywalker built C-3PO.
Yeah, I don't buy that either.
He's a standard droid. I mean, like, there's all these other droids that look just like him, and if he did build him, he must have just, like, used, he must have just used some plans he found laying around, like...
Yeah, and we're watching this lightsaber battle between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader here, and another thing for the prequels, it's like, we have the relationship between these two people, supposedly, where they're master and apprentice, and, like... He says he's master of evil and all that stuff, where, like, Obi-Wan, you cut off his legs and arms, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, like, the prequels make the Jedi out to be a little bit more morally ambiguous than they are in these films. And that comes from Expanded Universe. That was an idea that had been introduced there, and Lucas sort of took it there.
But this is a good versus evil story.
Exactly. And
I mean, like, I could see going there, but to start with it?
Yeah, exactly.
Where, like, it's not good versus evil to begin with, but then it turns into it somehow?
Yeah,
maybe, I don't know, but that's kind of what we get, right? We're morally ambiguous, and then we're going to use that to tell a good versus evil story. Maybe not everybody's going to agree with me, but I just find that kind of odd.
I find it really odd. Because it diminishes the impact of either one, even if one of them wasn't done poorly, Because you set up this status quo where, like, the Jedi are, like, it's so much more complicated than good versus evil. And you get to these movies, and that's not what it is at all. And you want it to be this, so it's just really strange.
I don't mean to make fun of the scene, because this is one of the best scenes in the film, but I do want to say that I always thought if I was gonna do a parody of this, I would with the scenes where Obi-Wan and Darth Vader are fighting, and they're right in front of that big conspicuous door. That looks a little bit like a big TV screen if you look at it right.
Yeah, it does.
I would just, like, do a parody where a whole bunch of stormtroopers just all sit right in front of it. Just they all sit down and watch it with popcorn.
That would be awesome.
Okay, so Dan, why is it that sometimes when you kill a Jedi they disappear, and sometimes that doesn't happen?
The reason they say in Expanded Universe stuff is Qui-Gon Jinn discovered this technique in the Force to become one with it, and he returns as a Force ghost and teaches Yoda and Obi-Wan the technique later on.
Oh, so other people don't know how to do that.
Right, exactly.
Well, that makes sense.
It does, especially since in that scene we see Darth Vader sort of stomping on the cloak, not knowing what's going on, like he's never seen that before.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that was handled well prequel-wise in the Expanded Universe, I suppose. Lucas never really touched on it in the prequels, but...
That's a really good point, though, that if it's something they all did, then he shouldn't be wondering about it, because he used to be a Jedi.
Right, exactly. But again, the film is not concerned with those sorts of things.
No. Well, it doesn't have to be.
Exactly.
They weren't intending on making those at this point, necessarily.
Lucas says he was, but
back. I just mean, while they made this movie, having no idea if it would even freaking sell, clearly that wasn't on anybody's minds making the film. Yeah.
I'm with you, But that's what Lucas swears up and down, like, oh, I had this 9-movie saga planned from, like, square one, and
I get it, that's fine, if it's true, okay, but the point when they put this out clearly was, let's act like it's in the middle of this thing that everybody's already seen before, because that's what going to Serial was like.
Right, and we get a full, cohesive story that you wouldn't necessarily need a sequel to if they had never made one.
No, you sure wouldn't. And you certainly don't need anything to set it up.
Right, exactly. I find it interesting that there's so many film franchises sort of trying to become the new Star Wars and heralding, like, oh, we're going to be the new Star Wars and this sort of thing, where, like, Star Wars wasn't planned that way.
Yeah, the way you do that is be awesome.
Yeah, like...
It's really simple, and it takes luck, and it takes skill, and maybe it'll happen for you, and maybe it won't. But we have got to stop just, like, setting things up for franchises.
Yeah,
We got to stop making franchises before we've even finished the first movie. Declaring things that. Now it's a franchise.
Yeah, and then we'll get sorts of things where they make the first movie, we don't get a full story, and then it doesn't perform at the box office, or it's just simply a bad movie, and then you never get the rest of the story. Now, if the movie's bad, you don't necessarily want to have the rest of the story a lot of the time.
No.
But still, you know what I'm saying?
But we need to just concentrate on film. If they're going to go to the theater, if it's going to be that kind of an experience. I mean, you and I did a whole podcast on how the medium of just film and television making in general is changing, and how, like, we're making seasons of television that are one big long film, and then we're making film series that feel like episodic television. And I think you just have to decide what you're going to make and make that, you know? So yeah, if you have a plan of, we're going to make these 3 movies, I mean, like, that's expensive and that's hard to do, but then, you know, okay, but not everything has to be that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of, to your point, I think a lot of franchise films nowadays will try to set themselves up to be a trilogy just because one of the most successful franchises, being Star Wars, was a trilogy. Like, it just seems like every time now we need to have 3 films just because Star Wars did it and it was successful. I mean, it works really well because, you know, there's 3 acts in a story, and you can have one movie tell each act if you really need to, but not every franchise needs 3 movies, I don't think.
I don't either, and the thing is, if you're not following that 3-act formula, then a lot of things don't warrant a trilogy, and we shouldn't, and at least we shouldn't be calling them that, even if we make 3 films necessarily. I mean, okay, call things whatever you want to, it's not that important. I'm just saying that, like, we need to not pretend like something is a 3-act story just because we made 3 movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dark Knight Rises.
And I kind of feel like the prequel trilogy has that problem.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because there's so much space in between them. I realize there's space in between these, but I mean, there's so much space in between the first and the second, especially. Why? I really would like to know why Lucas thought that we needed an 8-year-old Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. Like, it's very telling that couldn't have or wouldn't have worked as a 3-act story about Anakin Skywalker when he's not introduced until, like, at least 30 minutes into that movie, if not more. You know what I'm saying? Like, if we're not introduced the protagonist until, like, 30 minutes an hour into the movie, how is that a 3-act story for him?
And what do we learn about him? He's a great space pilot. Well, I know that from watching this.
Right.
I've been told that already. About 20 minutes ago, somebody mentioned, Obi-Wan mentioned that. By the way, speaking of Anakin Skywalker, can I tell you an amusing anecdote really quick?
Yeah, sure.
So, yesterday my mom came over, and Jason, my 3-year-old, is doing this thing now where he'll pick up some random object and he'll throw it at someone, and he'll try to get them to play a game with him where he'll name a category and you have to go back and forth and name things. And awesome. he goes, and he did this with 4 or 5 things, and he goes, Grandma, Star Wars. so they're doing Star Wars back and forth, and at one point, I couldn't believe he knew this. I don't know how he knew this. Because, I mean, he's only seen the first and the second, and he's 3. And he's got a little book about Star Wars that he's read, and I guess this is how he knew this. My mother throws Jason whatever little stuffed animal, whatever they were throwing around, and says Anakin Skywalker, and Jason says, I already said Darth Vader.
That's awesome. So he's never seen Revenge of the Sith?
Uh-uh.
Oh, well.
I couldn't believe that.
Keep him away as long as possible.
I already said Darth Vader.
And I never realized, like, for people that were big, fans of the original trilogy when the prequels came out and, like, were intelligent enough to realize that these, aren't the best films. Because, when I went to see Revenge of the Sith in the theater, I was like, this is cool because I was, like, a young kid that didn't really think about what he was watching. But, like...
And I was a senior in high school, and I liked it a lot better than I do now, yeah. It was just kind of... Those things, it was just kind of fun to go see Star Wars, man, like...
Yeah, and that would have totally ruined Darth Vader for me if I was, Because Darth Vader is one of my favorite things now.
Well, that's not how you want to be introduced to him.
Right.
No.
And this is, one of the most homaged scenes, too, obviously, is the Death Star blown up. So we saw an homage to this in Star Trek Into Darkness, where they were talking about the little hole that Kirk had to navigate himself into when he was out in space, and he's like, I can hit, the square side of a Gundark, or, something like that, but just in Star Trek words, before they launched out.
As soon as that scene happened, I was thinking, Dan is facepalming right now.
I was actually surprised that there weren't more Wars references in that movie, considering how many there were in the 09 movie. But
I appreciated that there wasn't so much of it. Yeah.
I love the Rebel pilots' costumes. With the orange jumpsuits. That's always been one of my favorite Star Wars costumes. The helmet is so cool too.
Yeah, I think so too. I've seen people cosplay that.
Star Wars is great for cosplaying because all the costumes look amazing.
Yeah.
See, we're getting to the point in the movie where it's just like the big action scenes and it's fun to watch.
Yeah. So it's going to get harder and harder to think of things to say. When we started, I was just sort of like, wow, I never talk about Star Wars. Maybe I actually do have places to go. And then I'm like, well, I exhausted all of that.
I do like that we're already sort of projecting Han Solo's character arc here. Like, even if they didn't know they were making a second film, there was places to go with him where he's... I mean, we sort of do get a little bit of a resolution, or him starting to go there, I suppose, later, where he swoops in and saves everyone. But I like that we're sort of projecting that, he's the thief with a heart of gold. He's not just, a complete scumbag that's out for the money.
I also like that Han Solo, he does something really likable in that scene where even though he doesn't believe in the quote-unquote religion that Luke believes in, he still has enough respect for the guy to say, may the Force be with you, and I like that.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like even when people don't believe in or understand or even think that the thing that you believe in is maybe a little bit silly, they if they appreciate you enough as a human being and as their friend, they're still capable of meeting you halfway like that. I guess we keep comparing these things, but you get that with Star Trek all the time with people that will do the Vulcan hand sign and say live long and prosper, and they don't know why they're saying that or what it means, but they're respecting the. Oh
yeah, for sure. You get that with
the discipline,
with the the relationship with the Triad all the time. They're always sort of meeting each other halfway, and they don't understand each other's philosophy a lot of the time, but they can find merit in it to some degree. And Han Solo later on will, have to find some merit in that when he has to rely on Luke to be a Jedi and save him and that sort of thing.
Well, that is the big difference with this and real life, is that there's actually a lot of real proof that this exists.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying Han Solo's an idiot for not buying into it. He's not. He's maybe somewhat contrivedly not witness to it very often.
Well, I mean, I think the way that it's set up in this movie is a lot more believable than if, like, we were in a universe where the prequels where the Jedi are everywhere and that sort of thing. Like, there's only a couple of them left in this galaxy. They've set it up where it seems big enough where you could buy that he's been all around and never seen a Jedi before.
Well, and something Han Solo doesn't realize is that this is part of the point of the Empire, was to quelch all of that.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? Where, so you've got this imposing force that has imposed all of this groupthink and has forced everybody to buy into one thing because they've stamped out the other thing.
Yeah.
And so even though Han Solo is so against the Empire, he doesn't realize how hard it influences everybody's thinking.
Well, I mean, I think he's...
Maybe I'm now also reading too much into Star Wars, but
I'm just gonna make your point for you with this information. I think you're right, because Han Solo was, if you remember, he was in the Imperial Academy. So he was sort of brainwashed into that way of thinking, most likely. And he sort of...
So he went to evil public school.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like,
yeah,
I realized how brainwashed he is.
Yeah, exactly. Wow.
It's great stuff.
Sorry, we're meditating.
See, these big weapons that the Empire has here, they're so cool looking. Like, the people that designed the models for the weapons in Star Wars and things like that were geniuses. Because, as cool as things like, I don't know, some of the other sci-fi weapons, some of the other franchises that have them, like, I think Star Wars by far has the most iconic looking technology. Like, you can show a blaster rifle to most people and they'll figure out what it is. A lightsaber, obviously, they'll be able to figure out what it is. It's cool that the things from this original trilogy world can look distinctly, like, you take them out and you can tell they're from Star Wars. They all have sort of a uniform look to them, even though, they look very different between the Rebel and the Empire technology.
I think a lot of the success of this just as a big, mega cash cow kind of franchise as the years went by is the same thing you were talking about earlier with cosplaying, that all the recognizability of this stuff. These costumes look fantastic, so it's fun to make them. The weapons are really distinctive and they look really interesting and they look fantastic, so we recognize them when they see them. So Star Wars works great for everything.
Yeah.
This is one of the best things to make video games about, because clearly, it being as action-driven as it is, there's lots of fun stuff to do video game-wise. We can tell great stories, we can also do great action-driven, you're-in-the-seat-doing things kinds of projects with it, too.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And, of course, it makes for fantastic toys. That's something that Wars absolutely has over Star Trek in spades.
Yeah, yes, it does.
Boy, do I love Star Trek, but I mean, the great be-all, end-all Star Trek video game has yet to be produced, man. That is hard to do. And it should be easier to do than it is, I think, but again, it's not a big, giant, action-driven thing. Same thing with toys. Star Wars is a lot easier to make fun, playable toys out of. Right, Star Wars, I mean. A lot easier to make fun, playable toys out of. Would I want a Kirk or a Darth Vader? I'm like, even me being who I am, I'm probably going after Darth Vader all day long.
Yeah, like, because like we were saying about just like all the weapons and the technology and stuff, the amount of accessories you can have for the figures, the vehicles, all of that kind of stuff. It's really amazing that this wasn't made with all of that merchandising stuff in mind, considering, like you had said, how perfect it was and how smart Lucas was in capitalizing on that.
I mean, once you get into the prequels, yeah, they look like toy commercials, but here, to a degree, they clearly knew how much merchandising they were going to do when they got to that point. And I mean, yeah, there was a lot of merchandising for these too.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, surely at least by the time you got to the sequel, they were probably thinking that a little bit while they were making things. But still, that didn't affect what all this stuff looked like. Like when you got like the walkers, those don't look like just immediately, oh, wouldn't that be fun to play with as a toy, right? Like they look grimy and used and just like everything else in this.
Yeah, and imposing, and they look very Empire. Big, powerful.
That's one of my favorite Star Wars things, by the way. I love the walkers.
Oh, yeah. I love not just the AT-ATs from Empire, but the AT-STs from Return of the Jedi, the two-legged walkers with the cannons on the front of them. Those are cool.
Yeah, those were the ones I always liked the best.
Yeah. I love
Although it seems like those would be even easier to take out with the ropes.
If Ewoks can take them out, anybody can.
That's a good point.
And we'll talk about that when we get to Jedi as well. Because the Ewoks are sort of the one thing from the original trilogy everyone has contention with. Which I don't necessarily agree with, but...
One of the reasons Darth Vader is amazing is because he will go out and fight right alongside the rest of his troops.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, one of the ideas that we had talked about before that the film sort of touches on but doesn't really address, were like, that's not something that happens in our world. Political leaders going out to fight battles with their troops? What?
No.
That never happens ever.
I'm not sure that happens anywhere.
Yeah.
Hardly.
Right, exactly.
I might be showing my ignorance by saying that, but I can't think of any country where that happens.
Even if it does happen, there aren't too many.
There aren't many, yeah, exactly.
This is so hard to say anything about other than this is awesome.
We're just like, well, we're watching some ships flying around, and it's kind of exciting.
I love the design of the
We're having a great time.
It's such a... the X-Wing fighter design is so simple.
Again, and really distinctive.
And same thing with the TIE fighters, too. It's just a circle with two rectangles on each side.
I love the TIE fighter design,
so
yeah.
Cool.
Again, I had a lot of Star Wars toys when I was a kid.
Yeah, I think if you grew up after the original trilogy came out, you kind of, had to have owned at least one Star Wars toy as a kid.
Or at least you knew people who did.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
Even if you weren't a big fan of it. I mean, I couldn't, even me not being big into Star Wars, I couldn't help but play with that stuff. It was great.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's, why it's permeated so... It's existed for so long because it's created a generation of people that want to work with this stuff,
Yeah. Sure.
Look at people like, we're going to mention Joss Whedon again, but
yeah,
one of the quotes that he said when they asked him about whether or not he would work on Star Wars Episode 7 and whether or not they should bring back the original cast, he's like, well, I wouldn't do that. I'd make characters that resonated for the same reason that the ones in the original films did, instead of homaging the past characters so hard.
Make something for a new generation.
Exactly, yeah.
I feel like that's kind of a problem currently, is that we keep going back to this old stuff, we're not creating enough new stuff for the generation that's growing up, and so, ergo, everybody feels the need to go back and see everything.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's good or bad, going back to whatever the original of something is. I mean, as we just keep reinventing things, that's not to say that we should leave things be necessarily if people love them and they want to keep making them. That's not to say that, oh, we've had too much Ninja Turtles, we've got to stop making that.
Right.
But at the same time, what is this generation's Ninja Turtles, right?
Yeah, you can't really think of
There isn't
very
one.
much, no.
But you see what I say.
Right,
that.
yeah, exactly. Like, I'm trying to think of things that have tried to be that, and they, I mean, in my opinion, have sort of fallen flat. Like, there's things
what I appreciate about the 03 series was that, like, kids could grow up with that and not know the 87 series, and it felt like they had their Ninja Turtles, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It wasn't going back to that too much. But then you've got the current series where the theme song is a riff on the 87 theme song. Do they think everybody watching it is 30?
It's strange, isn't it?
Because we're the only ones that are going to appreciate that. Those of us that grew up with it. Like,
I mean, I think a lot of it is just studios and, producers of these things, taking a name and they with an already installed fan base so they know they can just sell it to those people if no one else. Where if there's things like...
We're not thinking about the future.
Right. I mean, Avatar was a hugely successful film money-wise, but that didn't merchandise or permeate the culture, I think, as hard as something like Star Wars did.
I don't know that it's going to be memorable.
Right.
People years and years, maybe. I don't know.
I mean, I kind of forgot about it after I left the theater, but...
I don't think it's timeless like this is.
No. It's interesting that we've got a Marvel film coming out soon in Guardians of the Galaxy, which a lot of people are going to obviously compare to Star Wars. It'll be interesting to see how much of a shadow that hangs over it, because I've heard people at Marvel sort of say that many, many times, that it's going to be the Star Wars of our thing, of our universe, or whatever.
I think if they do it right, it can be that, without being Star Wars.
I think so, too. All you need to do is, there's other archetypes to play with than the ones that were used in these films.
Yeah, sure. And again, I think it's important to note, like we did earlier, that, again, this is very derivative, and we need to go back farther to things that people don't remember anymore and make them new again.
Right, exactly.
And not just keep trying to capitalize on a model that we know is successful already, because the problem with that is eventually it won't be. It'll get stale and people won't want it anymore. I don't want your movie to be Star Wars. I want your movie to do what Star Wars did, in that when I'm just talking about anything, as far as this kind of high concept fantasy stuff, where I watch it and it's like nothing I've seen before and yet is strangely familiar. Yeah, do that. Make it Star Wars in that way.
Right, yeah. I'd like to see someone go and make a Western that would permeate culture like this.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because
by the way, I'm sorry, I just have to say this. I do think it's funny that Darth Vader goes, "What?"
Stan Lee was under the mask for a minute there.
Like, the Millennium Falcon flies over and he's like, "What?" That's great.
Yeah, it is. I love the effect when the Death Star blows up. It looks like a bunch of stars flying around. Oh, such a great performance from Mark Hamill there, where he just looks completely terrified after he gets out of that really close shave there. I don't know. I just can't get over about how much I love the actors in these roles. It's so great.
This movie really holds up, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, like, I don't just mean to current. I don't just mean to current sensibilities, but I also mean just like to multiple viewings. I don't get tired of watching this movie.
No, me either. It's such a timeless thing, like we kept saying before, and it touches on themes and ideas that we all find inspiring and wholesome, and I think that's why it resonates with people in that way too, because it's such an inspiring and optimistic film.
I always like to talk a little bit sometimes when we do these commentaries, Dan, about the experience that you have talking over a movie like this, just because I find that fascinating, even if nobody else does. And like some movies we'll talk about for a long time, and while we're trying to grope for words to figure out what we're going to say, it feels like it took forever. And I mean, like, can you believe we've been sitting here for 2 hours?
I can't. At one point,
I feel like we just blew through this.
Yeah, I at one point looked at the timestamp.
Oh, there's the best part of the score right there.
Oh yeah, I love the throne room theme. It's fantastic.
Anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was looking at the timestamp and I was like, oh, we're an hour and a half into this movie? Holy crap.
Yeah. I couldn't believe the 20-minute mark. I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, and I found that we ended up talking much more about what this film did for culture rather than specific scenes in the film, and I feel like that was a little bit better because I wouldn't really have anything to say that hasn't been said about the specific scenes.
A million times. Yeah, it was almost more interesting, at least for you and me, to just discuss what this movie is culturally, and some of thematic stuff, because I feel like a lot of people just kind of watch Star Wars and go, "It's so cool."
Yeah,
and it is so cool. But how many times can you say that while watching it? Yeah. And you know what? It's such a bold film. I mean, I think part of the reason that it works so well is because it's not scared of what it is.
No, it's not at all.
When you come into that throne room, I mean, when you like you said, that throne room scene, when this scene opens, like, that always hits me in a place, man. It's like it's right in your face. It's so bold, and like it's not. At no point does it reel back and say, we're scared that this is too out there and silly.
Right. Exactly. And that's one of the things that struck me so hard about the Avengers film, in that it was exactly what this was, but just as a superhero film. That's why I loved it so much. And I found it really curious that a lot of people I saw around the community on YouTube and stuff were criticizing the Avengers for not being, quote unquote, a deep movie like Dark Knight Rises, sure, but they love Star Wars. I don't understand that mentality at all. Because Star Wars isn't a deep movie. It's a fun movie. It's got some ideas in it, but it doesn't really explore. But
yeah, I mean, sure, it can facilitate a conversation.
Oh yeah, definitely. And same thing with the Avengers, I think. There's like things about nuclear weapons and deterrence and stuff in there that, not really addressed, but there.
But it's not this deep character study by any means of anybody, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be. I always say that when I review films, I like to figure out what the movie is trying to do and see if it achieved that. And that doesn't mean that what movies are trying to do is always what they ought to be trying to do. You know what I mean?
Right.
You can't hold everything exactly to that standard. Sometimes it's like, no, maybe that was a little morally ambiguous. Maybe you shouldn't have, maybe you shouldn't have been making a film that makes me want to go kick puppies. But you did a great job. When I got done with your film, boy, did I want to kick puppies. No, I think maybe you shouldn't have done that. But when it comes to when it comes to things that are not ethically wrong, Avengers, I don't think was trying to be that. And I think some people have this idea of, well, it's Joss Whedon, and he knows how to make things that are really culturally kind of deep, and you are talking about real world events that are currently going on. And Whedon can do that, but the man's broader than that. He's prolific. He can do different sorts of things with all of the things he's made. So, does it have to be that? Did this have to be that? Do we have to look at this film and like you to your point earlier, do we have to dig really far down and look for things that aren't there just to justify why we like it? Can't we like it for what it is?
Right, yeah, exactly. I agree with you.
I don't feel like we're lowering standards to like Star Wars either. I think Star Wars is a different film than other kinds of films.
I agree with you 100%.
It's not an art house movie.
No, not at all. It's not an art house movie But isn't it interesting that this was like an indie movie when it was made? How ironic is that, huh?
Yeah, isn't it though?
It's
And isn't it sad that that kind of thing doesn't happen more often now?
Yeah.
You know?
It's just so interesting to me that it was started out as this indie thing, and now it's like the furthest thing from that. Oh, I can't talk. It's way too late.
It's the furthest thing from that.
But yes, I just think that's so interesting that it's now owned by Disney. Like even before that, it was a big multimedia thing, but now it's owned literally by one of the biggest movie studios around. Oh, this score! I don't get tired of listening to the score, man. I could just listen to it all day.
Dan, I really do think we should come back at least for 5 and 6.
I'm down for that for sure.
I think that should
especially
happen.
Empire. Empire is just a masterpiece of film.
Can we just do Empire twice? No, I'm just kidding. We discussed this one topic the whole time. Let's go to something else. No.
And I think people sort of underestimate the other two films in comparison to Empire. Like, I think they're just as enjoyable. Empire is just the best made of the three of them.
I agree with that. We'll have to talk about it when we do it, because I think that Empire is an amazing sequel.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, A New Hope is this wonderful standalone film that didn't need anything else, and then Empire comes in and you're like, oh, this all is a lot bigger, and isn't the sort of thing that feels like it's just trying to do what the first one did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's amazing that it managed that. It's almost like they trapped lightning in a bottle twice.
I noticed in Empire they went much more, I mean, we'll talk about it when we get there, but they went much more samurai than space serial, I think.
Well, but that makes sense because they hit all those beats already.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that kind of clamped them up a little bit when they made Jedi. And I mean, I like Jedi, but I don't like it as well as the other two.
Oh,
and
sure.
and I think it's like, okay, well, we did, that's a really great point, Dan. I mean, if we did all the space serial stuff the first time, and then we did the sequel, and we went, okay, let's go in this more explore this religion direction. Well, what do you do with the third one? Like, what else is there? So that's not to say that they had no story to tell, but tonally, I think maybe that was a tougher film to make.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think it benefits from being the film where you see everybody's life collapse too, so you get the characters at their most vulnerable, and that's where people connect with the characters the most. Because when you see someone at their lowest point, that's when you know who they really are.
Well, and when you finish A New Hope, you don't necessarily need anything else, but you finish Empire, and it's like a chord never resolved.
Right? Yeah.
You've got to move on from there. I mean, Luke, I am your father, and then you're done. There's got to be a resolution to that.
Right, yeah.
Well, anyway, thanks everybody for listening to Geeks Not Nerds, the podcast. Dan, I thoroughly enjoyed this.
Oh, I thoroughly enjoyed it too. Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
I have been really apprehensive about doing this, and I'm glad we did it. I really enjoyed myself.
Oh, I'm glad we did too, and I'm really excited for the Empire and Jedi ones now, because I think we'll have even more to say about Empire, because we're already talking about it now.
Oh yeah, well, and also it's a denser film.
Oh, yeah.
There's certainly more going on in it.
Definitely.
Well, thanks again, everybody. We'll see you very soon, I'm sure. I'm Captain Logan.
I'm Dan.